week on the Eldritch Lorecast. Do you think it was energetic enough?
Boy, it'd be great if Wizards allowed third-party publishers to put some stuff on D&D Beyond. And then Wizards says, hey, we may have a third-party marketplace. And everyone says, oh, boo. Boo, hiss.
But if it's third-party companies like, well, Kobo Press is probably not in the game anymore. MCDM probably isn't in the game anymore. And actually, Darrington Press probably isn't in the game anymore either. So
let's talk about this D&D community update. I'm out. That's all I've got.
We know.
I felt like a Shawn Merwin equivalent of, I just think it's really funny that...
And there is some hot trash in there, make no mistake.
You didn't say The Witcher, so I stopped listening.
After the last kerfuffle, I never want to hear the word influencer again.
All right, we'll use tastemaker instead.
One time I went to a panel at uni and the mum from Parallax was there. Anyway.
Okay, great.
Good talk. I want to see the Wiggles as Power Rangers.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG and D&D podcast in all the spheres. That's right. In a week where there's not much D&D news, this is the biggest news item of your tabletop RPG week. My name is Ben Byrne, and I'm joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. James, I have to ask, and this question coming in from Andrew, who emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. If you had to axe one of the current ability scores, a word comes from higher up at Hasbro, 6 is too many, we want to simplify the system, we need to streamline it, get rid of one of the ability scores. Yeah, you're the lead designer in charge of this. You're the J Craw, the C Perk. I don't know if he has a shortening of his name. Anyway, which one would you axe?
This is a really hard question to answer because I have a really they're both kind of radical. I have two answers and they're both kind of radical in their own way. The first one, if I had to axe one, if I had to be true to the spirit, I would axe charisma. Because I think that Dungeons & Dragons functions perfectly well if the role-playing is abstracted even further mechanically than it is already.
Okay. I don't disagree with you, but I think that like charisma is so iconic. Like, you know, the bard, the sorcerer, even the warlock. Dael Kingsmill, you looked shocked. Do you agree, or would you?
I did look shocked, and I guess I don't agree, but I also can't fault the reasoning.
That's exactly the reaction I'm hoping for.
Yeah. My answer is either Constitution or Intelligence, because I feel like even the skills list knows that Constitution isn't necessary to be an ability score. There are no like active Constitution based skills, so I don't think that we would miss it all that much. It's really just used for generating hit points, and you could abstract strength for that. You could abstract strength for most of the things you use Constitution for, or Intelligence, because I mean, look, we all have to admit the wisdom-intelligence divide is very confusing for people who haven't been steeped in this culture long enough. And it is a bit weird that we're rolling checks to see what stuff we know.
That's fair. Shawn Merwin, if you had to axe one of them.
There were such good answers here. My first answer is let's get rid of all of them. Let's just get rid of them. And, well, it's not really bold. It's just where the game is sort of going, right? Because if you're a fighter, you're attacking basically with a +5 at first level with whatever you're attacking with. If you're a wizard, you're basically attacking with +5 with the things that you are proficient with. So we're sort of homogenizing it down to everyone is good at their thing. So why not just say everyone is good at their thing? Pick the thing you're good at, and you're at a +5 for that. Things you're okay at, you're a +3, and things that you're not great at, you're +0. And there you go. You don't even need all those other things. But if we have to choose just one, I would go with Constitution, figuring in the same way that Dael said, Constitution really isn't used for any skills. It's not really used as the major focus for any attacks, for any armor class things, any spell casting. And really, if hit points are not your health, but they are your will to survive, as well as your stamina, as well as your mental acuity, as well as all of those things that keep you up, then why do we even need Constitution at all? Everyone just has the hit points that they have, and we'll call it even.
I know in a previous episode we talked about ability scores before, and even Dante just mentioned it in the chat too. And I want to say my second thought, which is, radical enough that no one at Wizards would accept it for D&D, because all of those ability scores are iconic. Bring it down to 3, and then have a list of skills. Have body, spirit, mind, and then have a bunch of skills that further specify. I think that's all you need.
I think that's almost a new role-playing system that I would be excited to try.
That's
somewhere
the
between
thing.
where the two of you are. Yeah.
T-Tip
I would play body, spirit, mind.
Yeah, same. I mean,
maybe that's what it's
in
called.
chat is pointing out that you don't really need both ability scores and skills, and that is something I've agreed with for a very long time. But it is so like baked into D&D specifically, and games that model themselves very closely after it. But I have to say, whenever I'm designing something from scratch, I have a tendency to scrap one or the other.
And I do respect the ability score and skill proficiency divide. There's definitely I'm not a weak guy, but there are definitely things that my strength is not trained for, and I definitely can realize when pure ability alone is not going to get me through something.
Here's a question along that divide, because I kind of like the way, or at least I like the intention, exactly as you're saying, James, around why there is a distinction between ability score and skill specifically, because you're right, like someone who's a bodybuilder might not be great at like running long distance, which maybe that's a con check instead of an athletics check necessarily. But my question is, how often are you in-game asking for purely an ability score check as opposed to a skill check? Because I almost never ask for a straight-up ability score check.
In the game, it's just generally when you're trying to knock something down with strength. In terms of like published adventures, a lot of times it would call for a strength check, but nothing else.
Sure.
Everything else I ever saw in a published official adventure was the ability and then the proficiency tool or skill.
Mm-hmm.
But that strength thing was different. It was, you didn't go to the gym and work out in exactly how to knock doors down. So therefore, it's not athletics. It's just strength.
That's so funny.
I was on the door knocking down team.
That one's not athletic enough. That's so
funny.
It
almost makes you think there should be a strength like demolitions skill proficiency or something like that.
Every time I've had that come up though, and maybe this is just a me thing as well, it's a knock the door in, and I'd be like, all right, make a strength check, and my player would pick up their dice, start to roll it, and then look at me with a little smile on their face, and they go, athletics? And I'd be like, yeah, okay, I guess athletics would give you an advantage in this situation because I don't know.
I am proficient with the battering ram.
Yeah. Yeah, have you seen
or
the nearest character?
Their shoulders, right? That's a football thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Or there's
a strength footy check. Yeah, there we go.
The dude or collection of dudes, I'm not sure if it's one person or multiple people, but they upload TikToks and it's like training to storm Mordor, and they're like carrying a barbell as their spear, and they have weights strapped to their arm as their shield and running on the treadmill. So they're doing very specifically the exercise that would need to get them strong enough to be able to storm Mordor. So you can train for that if you're ingenuitive enough, I suppose.
Cowards should be running on the treadmill with a shield.
No, it's Goku training. You train with something heavier so that then you're super strong. That's how it works. That's how strength works.
Then you drop the weights and suddenly you can move at super speed.
Speaking of dropping things, we are dropping this conversation to move into the news of the week. We have an announcement from Ghostfire Gaming coming up this week. Breaking news from Ghostfire Gaming. We have announced the next Kickstarter coming from Ghostfire, which is Ethereal Expanse, the setting guide. If you were a fan of Pirates of the Ethereal Expanse, which was our second fable, stewarded in its initial kind of inception by one James Hake, we are now fleshing that out. There is going to be a full setting guide coming in about a month, I think the Kickstarter launches. We'll have more to say on it next week, but if you want to check out the Kickstarter, I'm going to hit enter on the chat and put that link in there so you can go check it out and follow along if you want more updates there. Speaking of tangible yet very ethereal things, Next in our news update, the D&D Community update was put out by Wizards of the Coast on the D&D Beyond website. Did you folks have a chance to look over this? Anything jump out at you?
I didn't do it, Ben. I didn't do it. I read so much last week.
Yeah, sorry, teacher.
I will talk with you, Ben. Let's talk
Shawn.
about this D&D Community update. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the 2024 rulebooks being called 5th edition and not being called something else, and having them be just a polishing of the rules and not a complete edition. Let's talk about that. I'm out. That's all I've got.
I feel like we've talked endlessly about that. It was sort of we know.
It felt like a Shawn Merwin equivalent of, I just think it's really funny that...
They talked more about their support programs for schools and clubs to get access to D&D.
That's good.
That's great. Yeah, that is something that they've needed desperately, not just to do that, but to strongly consider how that ties to the game. If they want the end goal to be people playing the game, then they need to figure out how it is to teach this very convoluted, complicated game, not only to younger users, but through people who may not know how to play the game while trying to teach people how to play the game. And so this is huge news to me, and I wish that it would be more better broadcast, that these things are available, not only to schools, but to colleges and to clubs and to libraries and to all of these locations where there are people wanting things to do, and D&D and role-playing games would be a great thing to get them into, if we are to believe psychologists and psychiatrists and experts in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to put on my teacher hat for a moment, as if I haven't had it on this whole episode so far, separate from the idea of like it's good for the game or it's good for the hobby or it's good for Wizards to be able to grow like the next generation of D&D consumers, to look at it sort of a little less cynically than how that sounded, I just think it's good for, D&D or role-playing games in general. I don't even care if it's Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is great, but role-playing games in general in schools teach literacy, they teach numeracy, they're repeatedly practicing those skills, teaches teamwork, problem-solving skills, it's fun and engaging, it's just great in every single way for students to be able to engage, or young people to be able to engage with different aspects of their mind. It teaches emotional intelligence, it teaches how to work with other people, teamwork, if I didn't say that one already, so I like the benefits are absolutely
memory.
Yeah.
Well, this to me seems like a plan that has been 5 years in the making, because 5 years ago is 2018? Yeah, that sounds about right. Back around 2017, 2018, there was a major sort of D&D news story that cropped up surrounding a very positive story surrounding a D&D club and eventually a D&D class being taught at Lake Washington Girls Middle School here in Seattle. A great educator by the name of Ethan Schoonover, who I've met once or twice, a great guy, created a D&D club that got kind of viral attention on social media and became so popular within the school that a third of all the girls in this school were playing D&D in the club. Got so popular it had to be made its own class. And it taught all these things you were talking about: literacy, numeracy. There were tech skills, there were soft sciences, there were hard sciences being taught. And they wound up bringing a bunch of people from Wizards in. Jeremy Crawford was there. Kate Welch was there. I can't recall any others besides those two, but Wizards had a presence there and they loved this situation. That era has sort of passed. I'm pretty sure that educator has moved on to other schools, other things. I'll bet the D&D club is still continuing, but, Wizards isn't there anymore. The story is done. But I think it would be wonderful if that story could be replicated, not just by one teacher who loves D&D, but by some teachers who think that D&D is neat, who aren't diehard fans, who think it would be cool, and they know all of these things. So it seems to me like they finally got the money to make it happen, the folks of Wizards.
I can't believe you're trying to convince me that 5 years ago wasn't 2015. Stop lying. Stop lying.
The super cute story once. I don't know if I've told this before, but I was in a school as a casual relief teacher, and I asked a student a question. I was like, "Hey, have you done this work or whatever it is?" And the student's like, "Yes, sir. Of course I have." Like, "Yep, it's all done." And I kind of looked at him, didn't believe him whatsoever, tilted my head and went, "Deception check failed." And one, I was almost said it to myself more than the student. And a kid off to my left just goes, "Oh, you play D&D, sir?" And I was like, "Yes, I found one."
Also, to all the Americans listening there, casual relief, that's a substitute teacher.
Yes.
Oh,
correct.
Yes.
Yeah, to translate. Thank you. Casual relief teacher, just dinkied on, died down to the school. And anyway, D&D Community update. What else did they talk about? D&D Beyond accessibility initiative. Is something else that they're looking at. They didn't go into any real specifics. It was a very short paragraph or two, but basically saying that they've heard from the community that D&D Beyond needs some work in terms of accessibility to the broader audience. D&D Beyond is also the front door of D&D as far as they are concerned now. It is.
Which I feel like we've known for a while. Haven't they said that before? I don't know whether they use that specific metaphor. I think previously it was the gateway or whatever, but, you know.
I mean, I think a lot of this stuff, as Shawn opened with, D&D rulebooks are coming. The 2024 rulebooks are a 5e. I think a lot of this stuff is just confirming what was kind of a little bit in the ether beforehand. The ether of the Ethereal Expanse, you might say. It's coming May. Check it out. But what is interesting to hear them confirm, because I don't think I had heard this confirmed. I think I had heard it talked about maybe from the Creator Summit, was that they are looking for a third-party marketplace to create that in D&D Beyond. And I've heard a little bit, maybe whispers, echoes of concerns about what this might mean for DM's Guild specifically, whether this could, in some way supersede DM's Guild.
I know that Teos Abadia asked, when they announced that at the summit, he and the other attendees had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. And the answer to most of those was, So I think it was expressed with the intention of being great news that some of these content creators and some of these designers would have something to work toward. And then when they were hit with the inevitable questions, and not just a few, but like hundreds of questions about how would this look and what would we be able to do and what would it mean for the industry? And that's when the answer came. So I think this was just an acknowledgement that, yes, we are going to try this. And yes, we know there are a lot of questions. Don't look for answers soon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that we've talked previously about how it seems like the folks at One Bookshelf are bracing for the possibility that that DM's Guild might wrap up at some point, because, you know, we talked about the connection with Roll20 and that sort of stuff that was coming out a while back. You can go find that somewhere in our archive. So I would not be surprised at all if this is, it's the harbinger of a splitting off from DM's Guild. I wouldn't be totally surprised if that's the case. I think that there are good elements of that and bad elements of that. There are things like currently I think that the revenue split on DM's Guild is absolutely mind-bogglingly unfair. When it comes to publishing D&D content, you're giving up 50% of your revenue on products that you sell through DM's Guild, because One Bookshelf is taking their cut and Wizards of the Coast are taking their cut. So something like that will presumably be reduced on a D&D Beyond based third-party system. My ongoing thing is I really hope that the IP that you're able to use as part of that deal gets broadened, because, you know, it's one of the big things. It's like, yeah, you're giving up 50% of your revenue, but you get to use Wizards of the Coast's IP. And that is, you know, largely speaking, names of specific characters and monsters and the art that they enable you to use. But they don't let you use just any Wizards of the Coast art. They give you kind of these ramshackle packets that aren't really ordered in any specific way, and it's full of stuff from the 80s, which is not really the kind of look that you're going for in your current 5e stuff. I really hope that becomes broader. I don't know. I have my personal, as a lecturer of mine once said, my hobgoblin, my bête noire, my thing that pisses me off about DM's Guild. He couldn't remember the word pet peeve, so that's what he said instead. I've got my little things with DM's Guild, but I'm not like stoked to see everything fall completely and totally under the control of one company. So I don't know. I'm wary, but also keeping an open mind about the concept.
It seems to me like there's a cost and a benefit here, because bringing everything under one roof makes it easier for new people to find your stuff. I mean, that's kind of the Facebook and Facebook Marketplace solution to all of this. So perhaps that's great. But also, I'm suspicious of everything going under one roof because, to repeat an analogy, I don't much like Facebook or Facebook Marketplace. I try to avoid them when I can. So, hopefully as a sort of source for the game, if you want to run the game, there will be the core books and the virtual tabletop and the Unearthed Arcana and the third-party stuff. Hopefully that's a good consolidation. The big question is just what sort of content will be lost along the way. Because Wizards is not known for preserving their old websites very well at all. There's a wealth of content from the 3rd and 4th edition era in the developer blogs. Chris Perkins' The Dungeon Master Experience being one of the most useful resources for DMs and game designers ever published. And that incredible series is basically 50% gone. There's like a PDF archive that saved about half of them. And the rest maybe exists somewhere, but honestly, they're kind of beyond saving even by the Wayback Machine or the Internet Archive or whatever resource that is, just because of bad server architecture and a lack of interest in games preservation, which is endemic to TTRPGs and to video games as well. So, knowing the Wizards won't care about preservation or archival, be prepared for that yourself, right? As a consumer, if you know what you want from the old architecture, you should be making plans to save a backup of it right now, because it will just continue to crumble and crumble and crumble and be lost.
Even mainstay releases, like I recently did a video on our YouTube channel about hags, and there's a fantastic chapter that gives real practical rules for using different types of hag covens and what their lair actions would be and what their, whatever regional effects are, that I used a lot back in the day from Volos. And if you don't have a copy of Volos, I don't think you can get that anymore. I've got it through DM's Guild still because I had it purchased before Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse was released. But someone can correct me if I'm wrong. If you don't have Volos already purchased in DM's Guild, I don't think you can purchase Volos anymore if you didn't already have it. And I assume that book is also out of print now, so it's kind of like good luck going and getting your hands on that. So we're going to potentially see increasing examples of like, yeah, there's this great thing that like is awesome for your game. Good luck finding it.
One of the babies that got thrown out with the bathwater are some of those chapters in Volos, I think. Hey, it's back on the physical media chain. Here we are. Get your physical media, everyone.
Yeah.
I love DVDs.
It's kind of a strange thing when we at Ghostfire hear people saying, "Can we buy your stuff on D&D Beyond?" And we say, "No, it would be great if you could, but we can't." Oh boy, it'd be great if Wizards allowed third-party publishers to put some stuff on D&D Beyond. And then Wizards says, "Hey, we may have a third-party marketplace," and everyone says, "Oh, boo, boo, hiss." And if I'm Wizards of the Coast, I'm thinking, wait, you wanted us to help support third parties. We've interviewed now third-party publishers, including one Mr. Ben Byrne and I, and And so they are reaching out, right? They're trying to help third-party publishers in the ways that they can at this point and say, hey, here's maybe another chance for us to help promote third-party stuff. Maybe we could work together. Maybe we don't have to make adventures all the time because we have these third-party people making great adventures. And then people yelling at the third-party publishers who work with wizards because they're working with wizards. I don't quite understand the balance of this. I understand like the extreme cases, but this early in the process, I'm trying to figure out what's the win-win situation here. Or if it is a win-win situation, do we hate it because someone wins?
How dare they win?
Yeah,
I want to be the only winner.
The other side of the coin that I wanted to come to with this is that, like, I'm kind of excited to see third-party stuff on DM's Guild and be able to, like, at the moment, I'm playing a campaign where half the party are using stuff from the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, half the party are using Wizards of the Coast stuff. We might have, like, one random, feat or ability that might come from a Kobold Press book or something like that, that somebody is using, or a spell. And it becomes nigh impossible if you're not using official Wizards product to construct your character in D&D Beyond, which is hard because a lot of players, including players at my table, really enjoy using D&D Beyond and almost stray away from third-party products because they're like, oh, can I make that in D&D Beyond? No? Well, then I don't think I want to play that thing anymore because I kind of like using this system because it makes it super easy. So I am looking forward to that day where, we don't have to have the whole character in D&D Beyond and then like an extra slip of paper cheat sheet that has, all the feats and things that they've taken from a third-party book off to the side that they also need to remember but aren't seamlessly in with the rest of their character. And I've been increasingly using D&D Beyond as a DM which I never thought I would do, for the record, but particularly the last couple of weeks, have been using it to reference monsters, quick reference spells, quick reference class features, and it is really handy.
I'm facing that exact issue right now, Ben, where I am playing a Dark Envoy rogue using the subclass from the Valken clans coming up. Mm-hmm. And I've made the rogue in D&D Beyond, and I simply have not selected a subclass. And I've printed out the form fillable PDF, and I've just kind of copy pasted everything I need from the book, from our sort of pre-release copy of the Valken clans. And it's functional if I want to use a PDF, but that's about it. If that's what third-party content means for D&D Beyond, I think that Wizards needs to do a better job of messaging that, because we started this conversation talking about the DM's Guild, and we're thinking about it from like that perspective, from the individual indie creator perspective. But if it's third-party companies like, well, Kobold Press is probably not in the game anymore, and MCDM probably isn't in the game anymore, and actually Darrington Press probably isn't in the game anymore either. So wait a second. Well, so there's Ghostfire and some others.
It's another interesting thing to me. This so the idea of this third party marketplace. I got there in the end. Are they going to be angling this towards independent publishers who, work on their own, release this thing? Or are they going to be angling it towards companies like Ghostfire who are, proper, like, big established third-party publishers? Because there is kind of a weird little zone where everyone's grouped in together but have slightly different needs or plans or things like that.
All right, there's the homebrew section of D&D Beyond, which you can't make money from. You can't profit from that, but you can put your homebrew stuff up there. And I think the user agreement of D&D Beyond says that basically Wizards own anything that you put in here. And there is some hot trash in there, make no mistake. And there is also, I say with all love and respect, some hot trash on the DM's Guild as well, because it's an open source kind of publishing platform that allows anybody to put anything they want up there. You know, Steam is filled with hot trash, and most kind of publicly accessible publishing platforms are filled with hot trash. So that is a very interesting question, a very good question, whether Wizards are going to, because on D&D Beyond at the moment, there is a very strong kind of delineation between the homebrew stuff and the official rules. And you actually, it seems to me from how I've been using it recently, you have to go and seek that homebrew stuff out to be able to incorporate it into your game. It doesn't end up in there by accident. And so, yeah, that's a really good question about whether they will make this just completely open source and allow anybody to publish for some sort of profit share breakdown, or whether this will be kind of bespoke agreements offered to larger companies, or, you know, both in some capacity. Question.
And I think that's why we got the
yeah, that's fair.
answer at the start of this.
We're asking questions that have no answers. Yeah.
Not yet anyway. But, you know, they seem to be listening, which is good. And speaking of listening, they did say in that same community update that the next Creator Summit is going to be at Gen Con in 2023, so in August this year. So that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like, whether it's bespoke invites again, or whether it's a more open invitation, maybe not to the general public, but given the fact that everybody's going to kind of, like, you don't have to get on a plane, they don't have to fly you to Gen Con, right? You might already be flown yourself to Gen Con in that circumstance. So I'll be curious to see what that looks like. And then there was the last little tidbit, again, news that we already kind of know, which is that the VTT is going to enter a pre-alpha test, is the next stage, where a very limited number of people will gain access to it and be able to try it out and tell us what they think. And who those people are, I'm not sure. I think they indicated they were maybe some of the like streamers and influencers, some of the people that, dare I use those words, some of the people that attended the Creator Summit.
After the last kerfuffle, I never want to hear the word influencer again. Truly.
All right, we'll use tastemaker instead.
Perfect.
I have heard a Wizards of the Coast executive use that word in person. That person's no longer there, but...
Okay, cool.
And that's why.
It's a vocabulary word, yes.
And you know what, James? Fear not, because I have a very strong feeling I'm going to be there with my nose pressed up against the glass. Influencer, I am not.
Are you coming to Gen Con?
I don't know yet. But question mark.
Wait, if we could do a live Lorecast at Gen Con also, that might change my mind about not going to Gen Con. Wait. Okay, off the Lorecast. We'll talk about this off the Lorecast.
What are you doing Wednesday?
They might be disappointing. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of things that definitely are not disappointing, because I thought this was kind of cool. Also released, speaking of DM's Guild, on the DM's Guild this week was the Misplaced Monsters little compendium that Wizards released in partnership with Extra Life. If you haven't heard of Extra Life, they are a children's hospital charity that what I believe they did was fund kind of gaming in hospital contexts for children, video game, providing consoles and kind of, you know, fun and engagement for children while they are in hospital. And someone who spent time in a children's hospital when I was young, that is super important. But they also fund research and treatments as well. So they're a really, really fantastic charity. And the Misplaced Monsters compendium was a compendium of, I believe, 6 monsters off the top of my head that were initially concepted out by children.
It's just so cute.
It's cute. It's cute. I
had a lump in my throat as I started going through this and seeing the drawing from the children and then the professional artist's rendition of it was just, I was choked up.
It's just my favorite thing. Because kids' drawings are so chaotic.
But the Dandelion's my favorite, I have to admit. Both as a monster and as a piece of art. It's incredible.
Also, I mean, some of the kids, great artists to come. I mean, did you see Seth, the shape-shifting super speed dragon? I had to look up the name again.
As we sit here and grumble about the business side of things, and then you see something like this, and it reminds you of why you got into the game in the first place. The power gamers that we sometimes deal with, who are wonderful people, but tend to focus maybe more on the maths side of things than anything else. And just to see the pure imaginative joy that comes with this game when it's at the forefront of play is amazing.
They put out a video kind of talking about this as well, and Mackenzie, who works for Wizards, is one of the designers there, was saying that they love how, along the lines of what you were saying, Shawn, children don't have a concept of like what's right or wrong in terms of like there's rules in an adult game designer's mind. You can't have a unicorn cat with fire wings. It thematically doesn't fit or whatever. And children are just completely unrestrained by that, which is evident in these creations. It's also part of what makes them such great
D&D players as well, is that they really do just embrace that, well, I want to do this kind of mentality. It's wonderful.
All proceeds that are raised, I think the PDFs, it's not a PDF, it's on D&D Beyond, I should clarify that. It is $5 or $6 USD, and all proceeds going to Extra Life. I'm going to throw the link in the chat right now, and it'll be down in the thing below when you listen to this on YouTube or anywhere else. And there's also, I believe through that link, you can find they've partnered with Extra Life before and done another couple of supplements through the past few years. So you can find all those as well if you want to help support the partnership between Wizards and Extra Life.
Yeah, Extra Life is a great charity. They've been doing this for well over 10 years. They've been with Wizards and PAX and stuff like that. They're good people.
Speaking of feel-good charity moments, quick announcement kind of from myself and from Ghostfire. Next week is the Jasper's Game Week Aussie edition. So the Australian D&D streamers, YouTubers will be doing streaming all week. It's going from Monday 15th to Saturday 20th. It is in Australian time zones. I believe the first game on each day is at 12 p.m. noon, Australian Eastern Standard Time. I think that is going to be pretty late for the US audience, but definitely come and check it out. I am DMing a game on Thursday the 18th at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. That will be Wednesday evening US time, if folks want to come and check it out. It's going to be lots of fun. You can donate during the session to purchase in-game perks or penalties for the players. So you can make a $10 donation and somebody gets advantage on the next roll, or make a $15 donation and make them have disadvantage. That would make my day. So come check that out. It'll be streamed on the Meeples and Dragons Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Meeples and Dragons. And this particular week is going to be supporting the Black Dog Institute, which is an Australian charity for mental illness, anxiety, depression disorders. And it's a really, really great cause. So come check that out. Speaking of things to check out, you can also check out Eberron by Keith Baker, posted on the DMs Guild for a limited time only. Well, I suppose the books that are already going to be on there are going to stay on there. But Keith Baker has announced that they are closing the Eberron publisher that they have been running for the last little bit, publishing Eberron set books via DMs Guild, kind of doing an Uno reverse card on the licensing there, going well, Wizards own Eberron, but I created Eberron, so I'm going to use DMs Guild to continue to create official Eberron content. We talked about this actually only about 4 or 5 months ago. Keith Baker released, was it Chronicles of Eberron, among others. So yeah, sad news.
Keith Baker's a great designer. I mean, it's sad news anytime to see a great designer moving on from, one of his most beloved projects, because I assume the financials didn't make any sense. And, as we said, the cut of the financials from DM's Guild is just ruthless. I have no idea how Keith was able to produce such high quality books as those with gorgeous, Wizards of the Coast quality art. and editing from folks like Laura Hirschbrunner, who's among the best of us here. So it is sad, and yet also kind of a miracle that it happened at all. So, be grateful that it happened, I guess.
Yeah, and Keith has said that he will continue to run his Patreon, where he creates Eberron content. So you can still get Keith's work. He will still continue to do his blog. I think he just has to point a majority of his time in a more pecuniary friendly direction.
What a good word.
Very nice.
I think I made it up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was about to say,
it's real
such
now.
a good word. I need to go.
It should be real. And there's a different publisher who's going to publish the last book that they have been working on, and then continue to apparently receive the revenue from the sales on the DM's Guild. So we'll see what that company ends up doing.
Nice. All right. With all the news and announcements out of the way for this week's episode, I know we actually got through them all. I can't believe it.
Did we actually make it to a question?
I had
a
to double check.
Question?
I had to double check this morning that nobody had released a playtest. It doesn't look like it. So we do have some listener questions that we can get to today, which makes me very happy.
I feel like I've been crawling through a desert and finally found a real oasis. Not a mirage this time, baby.
If you want to email the podcast and ask us questions, you can email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. And ask us a question. You can also comment down below. I've been pulling questions from the comment sections on YouTube, but I will do that in future. And if you are here with us on Twitch, feel free to ask a question. We probably have time for 2 of them, so we might pick one of those up. And just quick aside, I always know we've had a long run of guests. Whenever the emails start saying, to Ben, Dael, Shawn, James, brackets, and whoever else may be on this week, amuses me to no end. First question coming in from Josh, who is asking about setting a campaign roaming the multiverse, which seems to be becoming an increasingly popular setting. I kind of editorializing their question a little bit here. Wizards definitely seem to be leaning into this multiverse idea a little bit more strongly as well. And just looking for advice for running a multiverse style adventure. What jumps out at us?
It is a horribly complicated question, which will get a simple answer from me. It would be the same thing as running a campaign where they go from one town to another, except what is in this other town may be a little bit more different than what is in a different multiverse. But you want to, A, keep the players engaged, and if being in the same setting keeps them engaged, then going off to a different setting may not be what you want to do in your campaign. 2, you want things to be different and engaging, but you want those difference and engagement to be something that the players interact with, not just something that looks down upon them from on high. So engage them in these different settings, cosmologies, planes, whatever you're traveling through, rather than just being this highfalutin story thing that they never really get a chance to have their characters feel and touch and taste.
Along those very same lines, to me, the idea of a multiverse spanning campaign, one of the great aspects of it is it actually shores up what, in my opinion, is one of D&D's weakest elements, travel. Travel is really hard to do. I wouldn't necessarily call it the weakest element. Maybe that's being unkind. It's the most difficult to have fun with of the many elements of D&D. Because we all have a story like this. I want to go to the Mountain of Wonder and see the wonders on the Mountain of Wonder. And you're like, okay, well, in order to get there, you'll have to trudge through a swamp for 7 days. Okay, you've done it. And maybe you had a random encounter. Cool. But if you're traveling from one plane to another, there's a very distinct opportunity for you to put some puzzle or challenge or magical bit of something in there, bit of game design that doesn't feel forced and random encounter like. You can have an adventure on the way to another plane that doesn't feel like filler, because when you're trudging through the woods, unless you love IRL wandering through the woods and having adventures out there, you can kind of feel like, get us to the Mountain of Wonder already, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
But if it's a matter of, finding the lost keystone that opens the portal of Krasador, then, that's the portal of Krasador we got to go through. And you can have all sorts of stuff related to that. So lean into the travel. Lean into what makes it difficult to get from one place to another. And because you're traveling the multiverse where, none of our laws of physics need really apply. Gravity, causality. You can do really wacky stuff with it.
Yeah.
So, okay, when it comes to talking about multiverse, right? Sorry, I'm excited about this. So you've got your two different kind of formats, right? Are we talking about your sort of multi-planner stuff that I think is what Wizards of the Coast have been particularly jumping into, which is a bit, it's your Radiant Citadel, it's Spyro the Dragon, it's the Magician's Nephew from Narnia, it's the Magic Faraway Tree. I think a really important key thing for making that work and make it fun is a really good hub location from which you travel to these other planes, right? You have this central place with central characters that you keep coming back to and can keep revisiting. It builds this really strong core from which these characters can visit lots of different places. And I think there's a lot of fun to be had there. Or you've got your sort of Marvel, everything, everywhere, all at once style multiverse, which is very much about the characters and the world that they come from by creating these differences, right? You've got your different Spider-Mens, your Spiders-Men come into your world. And it's about the differences between them and you, right? So you want it to be about, like, here's your party, your familiar party. They travel into this other part of the multiverse and they exist there. How are they different in that place? How are the NPCs they know and love different in that universe? It's about examining the differences in character and history, and really sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of that, which probably is more suited for a game where you are maybe a more contained sort of story arc where you are deliberately setting up interesting contrasts or metaphors or whatever through these other universes. That would be, I don't know whether this is advice so much, but it's just, a speculation. It's like, is your game going to be about just traveling to different interesting places, or is it going to be about these characters and what could have been in another reality?
I think that the hub world advice as well, in particular, is fantastic. Really strong advice. Just in terms of if you were wondering whether it's advice or speculation, it's both. I have deemed it. Anyway, moving on. I personally am not a huge fan of the Marvel style multiverse in particular, because as Overly Sarcastic Productions pointed out in one of their videos, as soon as you introduce that style of multiverse, the stakes get flattened into the ground. Because, as we saw in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, spoilers, I hope I'm not spoiling that movie for anybody, Wanda dies. This character that we've been building up for so long, but it's okay because there's 7 million Wandas, depending on how much Elizabeth Olsen chooses to return to the MCU.
What you need is a DC-style Infinite Crisis. Now that's stakes.
So I find that, like, Shawn said highfalutin before, which I think is a really good word for multiverses. And somebody else kind of commented in the chat, I believe, about, it feeling very quickly existential and kind of nihilistic almost, because if there's all this stuff going on, then nothing matters. I'm infinitesimal in this massive galaxy or infinite multiverses. Yes, I know how that's the real world works, Dael, if that's what you were going to say.
No.
But
it's just, I just think that, it's about how you construct the story. So I agree. I think that actually the Marvel Cinematic Universe has constructed their multiverse quite poorly. I'm also still, I can't forgive them for faking out multiverses multiple times.
Yeah, right.
When it would have been a better place to introduce the concept, and then they go, okay, we'll do it now.
Yeah.
Having
Spider-Man
said that,
made
I was
money.
very excited to see Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield again, and I cried. So, I mean, I am torn about the situation, but I think it is about how you construct the story, because when you delve into that kind of a multiverse, you have to make it about that your version of those characters, right? You still have to be invested in your version of Peter Parker. You have to be invested in the continuation of the world that you are attached to. And in that way, I think the comic books of Marvel do it slightly better for me than like the DC multiverse, because they're this is Earth Prime. We are the most important one, the main comic book thing. Whereas, in Marvel, it's Earth 616, right? It's very clearly just set up that this is one of any number, and why does yours get to be more important than any other one? But it feels more important to you because you're reading it and you're invested in it. Anyway.
I think the Spider-Man movie, in particular, the multiverse one, the Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire multiverse one. Thank you. It does it well because it feels more like the Peter Parkers aren't identical, because they can't be unless they wanted to CGI Tom Holland's face on everyone, which would have actually been really entertaining in a different way. But it feels like Tom Holland, Peter Parker's like friendly uncles kind of, appearing out of nowhere to guide him through this next chapter of his life. So I feel like that works pretty well in that specific movie.
It's weird. It has a lot of flaws as an MCU film, but I think it's a great next part for both the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans. I'm sorry, I'm having too many Marvel opinions. I'll shut up.
The number one Marvel podcast in all the realms. That's right. The Eldritch Lorecast is a multiverse. I think I need to pick a specific multiverse style setting that grounds everything that is happening. And maybe it's technically not a multiverse, but I'm thinking like the God of War kind of, the way that the realms are constructed in the Norse saga. Technically it's a multiverse. They're traveling between realms. Every realm feels very different, but they also feel like real places. And because you keep returning to them multiple times for different purposes, they feel more real the more you return there. And the stakes feel real because it feels like what affects one of them affects all of them. They're not infinite. There is a finite number of these different kind of multiverses and different wants and needs that are kind of, impacting each other. And I swear this wasn't planned. If I was to pick another, the Ethereal Expanse, I think, does that well as well, where it's kind of this hub multiverse between endless other possible places to travel to, but there are real stakes on the Ethereal Expanse itself. There's the Caroline Empire kind of trying to assert their will, and they're coming into conflict with the kingdom of Eris. James, help me out here. Eris, thank you. And then you've got the Drakes, who kind of represent the pirating and the free folk, if you will, of the Ethereal Expanse. There's real stakes happening here, even though you have these different worlds bleeding out onto the multiverse that's the Ethereal Expanse. So it doesn't feel so highfalutin. It doesn't feel so nihilistic and so endless, because it's not entirely infinite. It's and there's real forces kind of at play clashing against each other rather than just overlapping each other. Does that make sense? That was a bit of a rant. I apologize.
You didn't say The Witcher, so I stopped listening.
The Witcher has a multiverse, funnily enough. That's the big secret.
Oh, there we go.
Ciri gets mistaken for the Lady of the Lake in one of the later books.
I started thinking about Parallax, which is an Australian kids show. But I think it's a good example of like, yes, there are multiple yous in multiple universes, but also each of those universes matters.
Sorry, Shawn, what were you going to say?
I wasn't going to say anything because y'all are much smarter than I am, especially about Australian kid shows.
One time I went to a panel at uni and the mum from Parallax was there. Anyway, that's...
Okay, great.
Good talk.
Yeah.
One time I was at a school and Woodley appeared to show his
That's
child
wild.
the school. Yeah, there you go. Speaking of things that mean nothing to anybody else.
The Wiggles. Which universe are they from?
There is a multiverse of Wiggles now. They gave up. They gave up on like the 4 bespoke members, and now there's just multiple yellow Wiggles.
Speaking of end times,
It's sort of a Power Rangers situation happening at the Wiggles right about now. I want to see the Wiggles as Power Rangers. Can we get that multiverse to happen?
Surely that artwork exists somewhere online. Wiggles as Power Rangers. I'm going to Google that later. But not right now, because I have one more question I quickly want to jump to, which comes from Nick, Not the logistics guy, but listener Nick. Nick wants to know, how should a GM provide character advice to players? Should the GM give advice on what feats to choose, what classes would be helpful during a campaign, or any mechanical choices the players might make? And then editorializing again a little bit on the end, how much input should a GM have into character creation at all? Opinions, please.
I think there's nothing wrong with offering advice as long as the person wants it. You know what I mean? I feel like the first step is, hey, does this person seem to be having some kind of analysis paralysis? All right, well then I will let them know that I'm happy to give advice if they want it. I recently had a relatively new player who was playing sort of a Battlemaster style fighter and seemed to be really not wanting to make choices when it came to their maneuvers. And so at some point I just said, hey, if you want me to narrow down the list for you, I'm happy to do that. And so, deliberately cutting out anything that wasn't a ranged-based maneuver because they were playing a ranged fighter. And then after that going, I think these, 6 or whatever would be the most useful to you. And that just gave them enough space to actually make the choice. So I think there is definitely room to, give advice on character choices like that. But make sure that the person actually wants it.
Mm-hmm. It's so hard for me to hear a question like this and not just say, well, just talk to your players about it. Every table's different, because it's such a boring answer, even if I think it's the most true. But I'm trying to read between the lines on this one, because it seems to me like this is probably a newer DM, right? Either this is a new DM or it's a DM who has just kind of had a revelation. And the one who's just had a revelation, I say, talk with your players. But if it's a new DM who doesn't really have a feel for the ropes, who doesn't quite know what the standard operating procedure for D&D is, and they're worried about coming off as inexperienced, or they don't really have a pattern to follow yet, I would say the baseline that would be good to adhere to would be to tell your players, this is the kind of campaign I'm looking to run. If there are any particular exclusions from the player's handbook that don't fit your theme, try to lay out no more than 3, because otherwise you really seem like a jerk. Or at least kind of a bridezilla. You know what you're doing, Ben. You know what you're doing.
Oh, I know what I'm doing. Doesn't mean it's fun.
He knows he's being a jerk.
Yeah.
And from there, you go and you individually identify, hey, do you have a character concept you love? Do you have a character concept you love? You don't. Let's figure it out.
Sure.
Yeah.
How should a GM provide character advice to players honestly and with the campaigns and that player's best interest at heart? If you know that a choice that they're making is going to be something that clashes with the adventures you're going to be running, the type of campaign you're going to be running, they choose the blind fighting style when they're not going to be fighting anything that will help them by having blind fighting. You could say, hey, you know what? That archer feat looks pretty good, knowing that you're going to be running adventures that will call for a lot of ranged combat. So it works both ways, right? It can help a player realize the fun of the game, either game mechanically or story-wise, by stepping forward and providing these hints that will help everybody at the table, including that player. I want all the players in my perfect campaign as a game master. I want to have input into the players' choices for their characters. I want the other players to have input into those players' choices for all their characters. And I want the players to have input into my running of the game and my adventure creation to the benefit of all involved. And if you can get to that point where everyone is comfortable saying to each other, you know what, this might be a good choice because it works well with my choice of this. And you can just have that honest conversation with always the option to say, no, I really want to keep doing what I'm doing. I think that's when you get the best sort of game out of it.
Okay, that might sort of answer this question, because I think you touched on it pretty strongly there, particularly talking about the feats. But that's, something I'm really struggling with at the moment while running the game is how to provide enough information that players can make meaningful choices without spoiling the next story beat that's coming up, if that makes sense. And so in this specific circumstance, the use case is if a ranger picks forests as their favored terrain, but that they're pretty quickly going to end up in a snowy wilderness or a desert because you've got this, thing planned, how to let them know, hey, maybe you want to pick like something else. Should you tell them that, hey, you should pick something else? And is it worth kind of flagging the direction that the campaign's going to go in ahead of them discovering it organically within the game itself?
And it's also a tricky thing in terms of sometimes players will just make a choice regardless of what is useful, right? So a player might know that forests might not come up, but because their ranger grew up in a forest, it's important to them that they choose, they want to reflect the backstory that's in their head. And sometimes you just got to let them do it, even if you think it is going to be a suboptimal choice in the long run. It can be really hard to just sit there and go, all right, yep, charisma's your best ability score, even though you are a dex-based fighter. Like, sure, yep, cool.
Yeah, and it's not as hard to let them do that if the player knows what they're doing. I've had players, there's one gentleman, I've talked about him before at my table, who definitely deliberately builds suboptimal builds because he has a character in mind, a faith-based fighter who's chosen not to be a paladin, even though that might be optimally more kind of where his character sits. But he's like, no, I'm just a simple man who defends a village, and I'm not this like magic superhero who can smite things.
It's really interesting that you bring this up, Dael, because this is not a discourse I feel like we've had in a long time. I feel like, the role-playing versus optimization sort of Stormwind fallacy class. This is a classic RPG discourse. And there's been so many more high-octane ones over the past, I don't know, months and years. Completely forgotten about this. It's cool to see people thinking this way, that like you can create a character, even as D&D tries to become more streamlined, like we were talking about earlier in this episode, talking about ability scores, into here's the thing you do well. You're going to have a +5 at it at first level. Does it break the game? Are you shooting yourself in the foot if you've given yourself a +3 or, God forbid, a +2 in that thing you're supposed to be good at first level?
Yeah. It's a question of knowing the player, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you know that the player is doing this, and you know that in 3 sessions after they've hit 15% less than the rest of the party, that they are going to hate their character and be miserable, then you need to step forward and say, you may want to do this. And here's why. I want you to feel like you're contributing to the combats as well as to the role playing, because I think that's important to you. And if they still say, no, I want the +2, and you've done your best to explain your reasons, then they can live with the consequences, for better or for worse, of their choices. But knowing your players and knowing their play styles is also as important as the questions that we were just asked. Because that's what it's about, is what does the player want from the game?
Right. And I think, another consideration, this is way more in the realm of my personal opinion, but I think that it's worth noting, in my experience, it's also kind of a part of the growing pains for a lot of new players who are interested in the role-playing side of things, is building characters with, you can build a character suboptimally and, based on role play without shooting yourself in the foot, like choosing to be a faith-based fighter rather than a paladin. That is a character choice, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to suck at, playing the game. But I think that there is also a habit when you're just starting out and you're really into the role play and your character backstory, there is kind of a habit of making suboptimal choices that do kind of screw you over. But I think that over time, you learn how to build a character that is faithful to your concept, but also, you find your balance. You actually do know how to build a character that can hit when it needs to hit or whatever. And I think it's just kind of something you got to let players work through. I guess the only other piece of like actual advice I would have is when you are offering advice, I think it can be really helpful to always offer advice in the form of options. Don't say, I think you should do this. Say, here's some extra information for you that I think might be helpful. You know, here are some options for you to consider. You know, okay, I happen to know that I'm not going to be running this game in a forest. So you might want to consider whether or not you still want forest to be your you know, whatever they're called, chosen domain. I forget what they're called. But you know, always offer it in the sense of just giving extra information and letting them choose rather than saying, I think you should do this.
Sage advice. Little s, little a, but nevertheless, just as sage. Thanks. That'll be the end of the Lorecast. I don't know why this is so awkward this time, but that's my brand. So
real smooth.
Check out the next week one. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can give us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. A couple people have been doing so recently, so thank you so much. It really does help the podcast get out to more people. We've also gotten a few more views on YouTube and different places this past couple of weeks. So if you are new to the podcast, even on Twitch, welcome. We are very glad to have you here. Where we'll be back every week with another episode of the Lorecast. And if you want to ask us a question, you can email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. I read every single email, even the ones that are asking us to shill cryptocurrency. There's an annoying number of those that come in. But I guess that's what you get for having a public email. Anyway, I've been Ben Byrne here with James Hake, Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, and we will be back with another episode next week.
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da.